This video will definitely contain some spoilers, so with that out of the way, let's talk about the final episode of Season 8. So the first thing I want to say is that at first I love this episode. There's a lot of really good moments that happen, and it definitely is up there with the best episodes in this season. The first half hour of the episode though is mostly Rick's group preparing. There's some setup for Morgan leaving, there's Eugene showing that he can be trusted by Negan. Nothing too crazy happens. In fact, Oceanside isn't even seen. It turns out the whole bullet thing, the theory of the bullets, was true, and it was mostly all on Eugene. Gabriel gave Eugene the idea to do that. Speaking of Gabriel though, he did get the short end of the stick. If there's anyone in this season that suffered the most, Gabriel is high on that list. After getting caught by the Saviors, trying to escape, getting Dr. Carson killed, trying to escape again, but getting caught by Negan, and on top of all of that, he has some bacterial infection that's making him blind. Like, talk about a terrible experience. Now, I mentioned Oceanside, and I do want to talk about them a bit. I'm still perplexed as to why they're a thing. Like, I hate mentioning it, but it's something that's very just odd. It's off. Like, their entire story, all the investment we had out of them, amounted them to throwing some Molotov cocktails at the Saviors that were trying to sneak into the hilltop. That's what it amounted to. That's the most they did. I'm sure they're gonna, obviously they're gonna do some stuff afterwards, after the war ends. Things would have turned out the same way regardless, even if they weren't a part of The Walking Dead. But not only that, but putting salt on the wound, what Oceanside actually did was kind of minute. It didn't matter in the end. Tara and her group at the hilltop already had guns pointed at the Saviors that were sneaking around the hilltop. Tara could have taken them all out anyways. So Oceanside, kind of useless. All I'm saying is that if you plan on watching this season again, or if someone's watching it for the first time, they can feel free to skip the Oceanside episodes with Tara and they won't miss any story. But back to Eugene and the bullets. Once their guns exploded, everything was over. The Saviors don't have any weapons, their entire operation's a bust. It just outright failed, all because of Eugene. In the end, Negan lost because of those he trusted all betrayed him, like Dwight and Simon did. The only thing I find hard to believe is that all the Saviors in the war, it's implied they all sort of joined Rick and the others. Well, not joined them, but they stopped fighting them. They could have returned to the sanctuary afterwards. I mean, I just have to assume some of them were killed off screen, right? Because a lot of them were immensely dedicated to Negan. What about the people in Negan's higher command, the ones sitting at the round table? They would never settle for Rick, especially after trying to kill him for such a long time. I mean, especially if they knew Negan was alive. So this is all something that wasn't really addressed, but it was not a shorter episode, but it definitely wasn't an extended length episode, so they couldn't tie up every single loose end. So by far the greatest moment in the episode was Rick and Negan fighting. They were actually both crying at one point. Negan crying, that was pretty amazing to see. He was terrified. But what I think really got him is when Rick brought up Carl and what Carl wanted for Negan. Negan, for whatever reason, took a really good liking to Carl. He saw a grand future for him. He saw him becoming even more stronger than himself, a better leader. So the topic of Carl is definitely the only thing that would get Negan to that point in this story, which is why he felt so betrayed when Rick sliced his throat. Spoilers, but holy shit, that was crazy. If you've read the comics, you know there's this long conversation Rick has with Negan about a possible future where both of their communities can coexist and there's some kind of barter system. All of that was cut down to 2 seconds, which I'm actually okay with, because it would have felt out of place for Rick to say something like that, to have this long little conversation after all Negan's done in the show. While Negan's throat was cut, he was on the ground, he felt like Rick just stepped on Carl's legacy. And for a moment it actually did. A lot of people don't read the comics, so they don't know what could potentially happen. It just looks like Negan's dead. I mean, all that blood pouring over his hand, he was definitely gonna die. That scene is it's definitely worth a rewatch. So there's this conversation Michonne and Rick have with Negan as he was laying there helpless from the wound on his neck. I think the next day, I would imagine. This was the most I've seen Rick talk in the past 2 seasons. I think it was a nice change of pace. I mean, the terrible situation their lives were in, I suppose, was a thing that was suppressing him at least a little bit. I mean, like Rick's letter to Carl, in air quotes, as it might have suggested, Rick feels normal now, like he was in season 1. And I really hope we get more of this Rick, the Rick that talks more and doesn't, just look at the ground and kind of twitch his head. That Rick is cool, but we've had that Rick since season 5 when they first got to Alexandria. So Negan's taken prisoner and we don't actually get a shot of him sitting in the prison. I guess season 9 for that, maybe the trailer. We'll get in, I think, June or July. So I want to talk about the stuff with Maggie and Daryl, which really doesn't make any sense. The thing is, Daryl would never do that that to Rick. Like, obviously their plan's not to kill Rick. Their plan is just to kill Negan. Probably just to kidnap him and kill him at, I don't know, the hilltop, somewhere far away from Alexandria. I can understand Maggie wanting to do that. Her reaction to Rick's decision to keep Negan alive was pretty genuine, but Daryl makes no sense. Daryl is Rick's right-hand man. He would never do that. They're like brothers. Another thing is, like, they told Jesus about that. Did they really think Jesus would go along with the plan? Jesus is like the heart of the show right now. There are so little negative aspects about Jesus' character. Among them, I'm sure if there are any, I'm sure betrayal is not there. He would never betray Rick like that. He wouldn't outright try to kill Negan. The only reason I could possibly think of is that he was one of the initial groups being suppressed, him and the Kingdom. So he's been under Negan's rule for a lot longer than Rick ever was. But it is odd, like the way this episode left off Maggie and Daryl's character is that like Maggie's gonna be the villain for the next season. Like I don't think she is. I think all of that stuff is gonna amount to maybe one episode, like one little skirmish. Like their little coup to kill Negan doesn't happen in the comics. So I part of me thinks it's Gimple's way of like letting fans have the possibility of Negan dying in the next season by Maggie and Daryl. It's just very odd of them to consider that. So the last shot we get of Morgan is with Jadis, relaying a message that she can now join the community. Jadis agrees, which is awesome. I mean, she really doesn't have a place to be right now. Her community is pretty much gone. Of course, I mean, technically speaking, the very last scene we get with Morgan in The Walking Dead, quote unquote, is the cameo we got with Rick and Jesus in the intro to the premiere of Fear the Walking Dead. One other point I want to make is that Jadis should tell Rick about the helicopter, right? She should bring it up as a discussion point if it's going to be something that would be beneficial to the community. Like, who are those people? Like, if she's going to be living there for however long the time skip is, which I think might be a year, 8 months, just enough for Maggie to have her baby, perhaps, Jadis should explain what that was, who those people are. Although that being said, Rick has never associated the helicopter with Jadis. As far as Rick's concerned, I guess the helicopter was just a hallucination. So I haven't seen the first episode of Fear the Walking Dead yet, so here's to hoping it's better than it was. But if you've seen it, let me know in the comments below what you think about it. But as usual though, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe and like, it always helps, and I'll see you in the next one.